This video has been brought to you by the Partnership for Conflict, Crime, and Security Research. Today, we're joined by researchers from Safe Seas, whose work explores transnational organized crime at sea.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Christian Bueger. I'm the co-director of the Safe Seas network. And today we are here to talk about the TOCAS project. And TOCAS stands for Transnational Organized Crime at Sea. And I'm here joined by Professor Tim Edmunds from the University of Bristol, who is the principal investigator of that project and who is one of the other directors of the Safe Seas network. I'm also being joined by Dr. Scott Edwards, who also works at the University of Bristol and who is the research associate on that project. Very quickly about Safe Seas and the project. Safe Seas is a broad international network of scholars interested in maritime security in different regions of the world. And I'd like to invite you to visit our website. The website is safeseas.net. And there you can also follow our Twitter account, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter. There's a fantastic number of events coming up and really important information and publications on maritime security, and in particular on blue crime. And blue crime, this is exactly what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to do this as a conversation. And I'm going to ask a number of questions, which Tim Edmunds then hopefully has amazing answers and interesting insights to. Let us start in the following way and talk a little bit about the sea. Blue crimes, quite obviously, that's talking about the sea, what happens at sea. Now, when we talk about crime and security, most often we do not really think about what happens at sea. So then the question we have to start with is, why should we pay more attention to crime at sea? Tim.
Well, I think there's a number of, there's some interesting reasons why I think crime at sea has had less attention paid to it than some other areas. But in terms of the basic reason why I think we need to study it is because, for a start, there's an awful lot of crime that takes place in the maritime arena or in its environs. But also, if we're talking about transnational crime, transnational organized crime, that implies the movement of criminals or illicit goods or criminal activities between countries and between regions. And often those movements take place at sea. However, it's been striking for us in our work on maritime security that, as in so many other areas, including more traditional areas of security and law enforcement, when it comes to maritime crime or blue crime, there is a continuing legacy of sea blindness, both in terms of how these issues have been treated in academic disciplines, but also often at a policy and practitioner level. Now, that doesn't mean that the sea has been absent from these debates. There's been lots of very interesting work done on the sea, but often from a security perspective, that tends to concern the role of navies and great power competition at sea and sort of military confrontations. Alternatively, there's a lot of work from legal scholars around the law of the sea and related issues around that. But actually, what falls through those two areas is often maritime security issues more broadly defined, which tend to cross between what might be seen as traditional security challenges and those that are challenges for law enforcement. So both at a policy and practitioner level, but also at an academic level, we think there is this very, very interesting space of work around the area of blue crime and maritime security that is both critical for understanding transnational organized crime at sea, but also opens up some very interesting themes and conversations within and between disciplines. I mean, the other point I would make is that this legacy of sea blindness is something that has changed a little bit in recent years, not least because of the rise of piracy off the coast of Somalia in the 2000s that brought a lot of international attention to the issue of piracy, but also issues of illegal fishing, fisheries crime, and so on. That in the UK case, at least, have been particularly brought into focus by the Brexit process. So the answer is that there are a lot of extremely important and significant facets of transnational organised crime that involve maritime components, that these have often not been looked at as much as they perhaps should be because of legacies of sea blindness, and that this is beginning to change, and our project is part of building on that momentum to cast the notion of blue crime more widely.
Oh, fantastic. So we are living in a new age, so to say, of sea awareness, and this is then the project, what the project actually also opens up and contributes to more broadly. You mentioned piracy, in particular in Somalia. Now, piracy is also going on in various other areas, as well as illegal fishing. And indeed, in the environmental community, there has been a lot of attention to the harm actually being caused by illegal fishing. Now, when we're talking about transnational organized crime at sea or blue crime, would you say that these two are the most important ones? Are these the crimes that we should center all of our attention to, or would you rather suggest that we should think in different or new directions?
Well, I mean, I think part of the philosophy of the PaCCS project is that we do need to think in broader terms about what we mean by blue crime, and there are a number of reasons for that. The first is that, well, piracy and illegal fishing are perhaps the two most high-profile maritime crimes, but they're one of a whole pattern of activities, of criminal activities, organised criminal activities that take place at sea or in the environs of the sea. So, for example, that includes a whole range of issues around smuggling of various sorts, whether the smuggling of narcotics, the smuggling of people, smuggling of arms, but also issues like wildlife smuggling, and indeed the smuggling of legal goods for illicit purposes. Blue crime itself is cast much more widely than piracy and illegal fishing. And the other thing that we've drawn out quite a lot in the project is the significance of various forms of environmental crime at sea. Now, that, of course, we include illegal fishing in, or fisheries crime, but it also includes a whole range of issues around, for example, pollution, around illegal resource extraction and mining, critical infrastructure. So actually, once we start looking at blue crime, it becomes much more than just about piracy and illegal fishing. Now, I think there's two interesting implications from that. The first is that when we look at what the policymakers and the practitioners are doing, they are also broadening out their approaches and understandings towards blue crime. So Christian mentioned piracy off the coast of Somalia. Now, piracy off the coast of Somalia has largely been suppressed since 2012. However, one of the interesting features of counter-piracy operations in that region is that they've not gone away, and that the maritime security and law enforcement structures that were established in the Western Indian Ocean in response to piracy are still present, but have broadened their attention to wider issues of maritime security, whether that's narcotics trafficking down through the Western Indian Ocean or whatever. And we can see some quite similar patterns in other areas. So I mentioned that piracy has largely been suppressed off the coast of Somalia. That's certainly not the case in the Gulf of Guinea at the moment, which is emerging as something of a hotspot for contemporary piracy. But also, again, in the Gulf of Guinea, there are a range of other issues, environmental crimes at sea, trafficking issues, and so on. And the second reason why that's important is because we think there's good reason to believe that there are some important synergies and interlinkages between crime. And maybe that's something I can say more about in a minute. But the more we dig into what's happening in terms of the expressions of maritime crime and the organised networks behind that, thinking in these kind of rather compartmentalised ways about specific issues is not always particularly helpful because of the adaptive nature of crime at sea in various sorts of ways. So basically, we think in order to understand blue crime, we have to take this broader picture and to understand both the range of issues that are at play, but also the interconnections and the synergies between them. And as I say, that again follows what is happening in some parts of the world in terms of maritime security practitioner and policy making responses.
Mm-hmm. So we have to think a little bit more wider in terms of going beyond piracy, going beyond illegal fishing, and of course you mentioned this broader spectrum of environmental crimes. What is of course interesting also here and quite important is this idea to compare over regions, that similar things might be happening, as you just rightfully emphasized. Now, let's talk a little bit about blue crime. So this appears to be a new label. And in one of the articles that is coming out of the TOCAS project, which is forthcoming with the Journal of Marine Policy, there's an argument of why we should talk about blue crime and not transnational organized crime at sea or just crime at sea. So what's behind this, and why should we talk about blue crime and think in terms of blue crime rather than with other labels?
So we've opened up what, so we've started to use, and we're working with the concept of blue crime in order to open the space up in terms of precisely these issues that we're looking at. So this actually started from an internal process within the project, where we were trying to grapple at the very beginning of the TOCAS project was, what do we actually mean when we're talking about transnational organised crime at sea? What fits within that category, and what lies outside it? And some of our initial reading and our initial approach, I think we were struggling with some of the more established frameworks for looking at transnational organised crime at sea. Now, broadly, they comprise legal concepts and approaches, which we found could often be a little bit too restrictive. So we've worked a lot, for example, on the UN Convention on Organised Crime at Sea in terms of building our own definitions, and also UNCLOS and other specifically maritime conventions and legal statutes. But of course, the issue that raises is that crime differs over time and space, because crimes are crimes. They are criminalized through social processes and political processes. And that's a particular issue when we look at issues of crime at sea, both because they take place between and across lots of different national jurisdictions, but they also sometimes take place on the high seas, which are areas of shared or at least partial sovereignty amongst states, and governed by the UNCLOS Convention, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And so we found, and also that the issue of so issues of legality can differ, and they also can be conducted by vessels of uncertain nationality or no nationality or whatever. So the concept of how national laws apply and legal concepts at sea is problematic. So we also were looking at and drawing in perspectives from criminology, which we found very helpful. But we also felt that there was a problem of diversity within some of the criminological approaches, in that different theoretical approaches lead to different ways of thinking about what's a crime and what's not. So we needed some kind of halfway house that gave us something to work on, but was broader than perhaps the legal concepts provided. And so we settled on a pragmatic approach through this notion of blue crime that is rooted in legal concepts, but also recognizes their limitations and some of the problems that they have. So we try and complement that with some criminological insights. For example, drawing on some of the work around green criminology in relation to how we think about criminal activities or activities that cause significant harms at sea, but for example, where there may not be obvious human victims, or in certain parts of the world where legal frameworks are not clear or are not applied. So blue crime is a pragmatic concept that tries to let us get at some of these issues through understanding how and where they take place, what the different groups and business models within those different activities are, and how they cross over into each other, and how they cause harms in various different ways, including to the environment and to marine biodiversity and so on.
So blue crime opens up new space, right, between the legal discussion and the criminological discussion. So that's actually a very productive new way then how to think about not only the disciplinary links, but also how different crimes intersect, as you said earlier,
I
and
think that's
how.
absolutely right, Christian, and it actually pushes to understanding, or pushes us to explore the different synergies and commonalities across and between crimes. And I think there's some very interesting. Some of the research that we've been doing is drawing out some very interesting findings in that respect.
What do you mean by synergies here? Synergies between what?
So, for example, I think when we look at, so I think there are synergies in a couple of areas. So often the entry requirements for engaging in blue crime are relatively low. They involve access to a boat, they involve access to seamanship skills, and perhaps access to a gun if the crime involves violent activities. Those kinds of skills can equally be applied to piracy. Those kind of capacities can be applied to piracy. They can be applied to arms smuggling. They can be applied to narcotics trafficking. They can be applied to legitimate fishing activities, and so on. So I think when we look at what is required to carry out blue crimes, that there are significant commonalities across the different types of crime. Now, that's interesting because it means that if you define someone as a pirate, that might be fine if they're engaging in piracy. But then those same people, those same criminal networks may also, and indeed we have evidence for this, adapt and engage in other kinds of crimes as well, or indeed at legitimate activities. So I think there are kind of capacity synergies across the crimes. The other important issue that comes out of this is that once we start looking at how crimes are organized, the criminal networks themselves are often enduring and adaptive. So we've talked a lot about the suppression of piracy off the coast of Somalia. Well, most research suggests that while the actual activities of piracy have been suppressed, the piracy networks, the organized criminal networks that lay behind piracy off the coast of Somalia have persisted. But they have adapted in response to counter-piracy measures and a whole range of other different things. And so there's a lot of evidence, for example, that the pirate networks have actually moved their activities into other forms of maritime crime, like, for example, people smuggling between Somalia and Yemen, like arms trafficking, even some suggestions of being engaged in narcotics trafficking down through the Indian Ocean. So again, it comes from, if we take this blue crime view, it encourages us to look at these kind of look beyond the narrow sectoral issues of a particular type of crime, to consider the organized networks behind it and the kind of capacities and intersections that happen.
So that concludes our conversation. Thank you for joining us here today. We spoke about the importance of the paradigm shift blue crime. We spoke about sea blindness and sea awareness and how to think more broadly, and about the importance of the evidence base that the TOCAS project is constructing. And we very much look forward to the launch event. And until then, everyone is invited to visit the website of the project, which is at safeseas.net. Thank you.
This video has been brought to you by the Partnership for Conflict, Crime, and Security Research. You can learn more about our work, including our transnational organized crime theme, at pacsresearch.org.uk.